I walked into the bank to cash out $10,000 and walked into a room where people suddenly treated me like I owned the building. The teller's face drained white, and the manager grabbed my ID with shaking hands before whispering that this account was tied to a legacy release. Today was the trigger date. I thought my ex was mocking me, but it turns out he was counting on me for 7 years. My name is Paisley Reed, and at 33 years old, I stood in the middle of the Granite Harbor Bank in downtown Dallas, clutching a piece of plastic that felt less like a debit card and more like a live grenade. The air conditioning in the lobby was aggressive, a sterile chill that seemed designed to freeze out anyone whose net worth did not hit 7 figures. I pulled my thin pilling cardigan tighter around my chest. It did nothing to stop the shivering, but I knew the cold was coming from inside my bones. I looked down at the card in my hand. It was red, or at least it had been red 7 years ago. Now the edges were frayed white, the magnetic strip scratched from being tossed into the bottom of junk drawers and shoeboxes. Moving with me from one disastrous apartment to another, I had not swiped it once, not once in 2,555 days. To use it felt like admitting defeat. To use it meant accepting the charity Grant Whitaker had thrown at my feet in the rain the day he discarded me like a used wrapper. But pride does not pay Vernon Sykes. The memory of this morning hit me with the force of a physical blow. Vernon, my landlord, had pounded on my door at 6 a.m. with a fist like a sledgehammer. The wood had rattled in the frame, dusting my bare feet with paint chips. When I opened it, he did not even look at me. He looked past me, assessing the few pieces of furniture I had left to sell. He told me I had 48 hours. 48 hours to come up with 3 months of back rent, or my belongings would be on the curb before the sun set on Friday. And that was not even the noise that drowned out my thoughts. It was the buzzing in my pocket. The loan shark I had visited in a desperate attempt to cover my mother's chemotherapy copayments had started texting me every hour on the hour. The interest was compounding by the minute. I was drowning. I was suffocating in a city that moved too fast for me to catch my breath. So here I was, selling out, surrendering. I shuffled forward in the line. The velvet rope separating the queue felt like a barrier between species. The woman in front of me wore a blazer that probably cost more than my entire existence. She smelled of expensive vanilla and fresh printer ink. I smelled of the damp bus seat I had occupied for 45 minutes and the lingering scent of anxiety sweat. I tried to smooth down my hair, but I caught my reflection in the polished brass of a pillar. I looked haunted. My eyes were dark hollows, my skin pale and drawn. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman who had lost everything. Next, a digital voice announced. I walked to the counter. The teller was a young woman with a name tag that read, Brielle Knox. She had perfect winged eyeliner and a manicure that tapped impatiently on the marble countertop. She did not smile. Her eyes flicked down to my scuffed sneakers, then up to my face, registering the poverty with a professional detachment that stung worse than an insult. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting she very much doubted she could. I slid the red card across the marble. It made a cheap, scratching sound. I placed my ID on top of it. My voice was rusty. Unused to speaking in rooms where the acoustics were designed to amplify authority. "I want to withdraw everything," I said. "I want to close the account." Brielle picked up the card with 2 fingers as if it might be infectious. She looked at the worn paint, the dated design. She probably thought I was cashing out a checking account with $15 in it. She sighed, a short, sharp exhalation of boredom, and turned to her terminal. I watched her fingers fly across the keyboard. I held my breath. I was terrified the card had expired. I was terrified Grant had canceled it years ago just to laugh at me one last time. I was terrified that the $10,000 was gone and I would have to walk back out to the street and tell Vernon Sykes he could take the apartment. Then Brielle stopped typing. Her fingers froze mid-air. The boredom vanished from her face, replaced instantly by a slack-jawed confusion. She blinked. She leaned closer to the screen, her nose almost touching the glass. She hit a key, then another, harder this time. Her complexion, previously flushed with the warmth of the room, drained into a sheet of white. I gripped the edge of the counter. My knuckles turned ivory. "What is it?" I asked. "Is something wrong?" Brielle did not answer me. She did not even look at me. She looked at the card on the desk as if it had just transformed into a gold bar. She swallowed hard, her throat clicking audibly. "I need to verify something in the system," she stammered. Her voice had jumped an octave. "Please wait right here. Do not leave." She scrambled off her stool and practically ran toward the heavy oak door behind the teller line. I was left standing alone. The silence around me felt heavy. The woman in the expensive blazer was staring at me now. The security guard by the door shifted his weight, his hand hovering near his belt. Panic began to claw at my throat. Had I triggered a fraud alert? Was the card stolen? Was the police on their way? I looked at the exit. It was 50 feet away. I could run. I could leave the card and the humiliation and just run back to my hole in the wall. Before I could move, the oak door swung open. Brielle was not alone. A man walked out. He was wearing a suit that looked tailored, but right now, it looked like it was suffocating him. He was balding, with a face that was usually composed, but was currently slick with a sheen of sweat. His name tag identified him as Elliot Harrow, branch manager. He did not walk toward me. He rushed. He unlatched the small gate separating the employees from the public and stepped into the lobby. He ignored the woman in the blazer. He ignored the line of people. He came straight to me. "Ms. Reed," he said. He was breathless. I took a step back, terrified. "I am sorry," I said, my voice trembling. "If there is a problem, just keep the card. I will just go." "No," Harrow said, almost shouting. He reached out as if to grab my arm, then pulled back, fearing he might breach protocol. "Please, do not leave. We have been waiting for you, waiting for me." The words made no sense. I had been invisible for 7 years. "Please, come with me," Harrow said, gesturing toward the glass-walled offices at the back of the bank, the ones with the plush leather chairs and the blinds that were always drawn. "We should speak in private." I felt the eyes of everyone in the bank on me. The beggar being escorted to the palace. I followed him, my legs feeling like lead. I sat in a chair that cost more than my mother's medical treatment for a month. Harrow closed the door and twisted the blinds shut, plunging us into a semi-private gloom. He sat across from me. He was shaking. I saw his hands trembling as he clasped them on the desk. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and awe. "Ms. Reed," he began, his voice dropping to a whisper so low I had to lean in to hear him. "I assumed you were here because you received the notification." I stared at him. "I do not know what you are talking about," I said. "I just wanted the $10,000. My husband gave me that card 7 years ago." Harrow blinked. $10,000, he repeated. He let out a strange, hysterical little puff of air that might have been a laugh. He leaned forward. The air in the room felt electric, dangerous. "Ms. Reed," he whispered, "this is not a standard checking account. This account is tied to a legacy release protocol. It has been dormant, accruing compound interest and dividends in a high-yield locked trust for 84 months. He paused, looking at the calendar on his desk, then back at me. "And today is the trigger date," he said. "The system unlocked the moment you swiped that card." I sat there, the blood roaring in my ears. I thought Grant had given me that card to mock me. I thought it was hush money. Harrow looked at me, his eyes wide. "You did not know," he said. It was not a question. I shook my head. The manager swallowed hard. "Whatever you thought this was, Ms. Reed, you were wrong. The funds in this account were never just $10,000. That was just the seed." I felt a cold chill walk down my spine. The room felt too small. The silence was deafening. I looked at the red card sitting on his mahogany desk, innocent and terrible. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely a breath. Harrow opened a folder. His hands were still shaking. He looked like a man who was about to defuse a bomb. "It means," he whispered, "that we need to verify your identity, because the balance on this screen is too large to be dispensed by a teller." The air in the bank manager's office seemed to vanish, sucked out by the sheer impossibility of his words. The red card on the mahogany desk blurred, losing its shape until it was just a smear of color against the darkness of my memory. Suddenly, I was not sitting in a plush leather chair in 2026. I was standing on the concrete steps of the Dallas County Courthouse, and I was drowning. It was 7 years ago. The sky that day had been the color of a fresh bruise, purple and swollen with a storm that had threatened all morning before finally bursting open the moment the judge banged his gavel. I stood outside the heavy glass doors, shivering in a dress that was too thin for the season. In my hand, I clutched the divorce decree. The paper was cheap and already damp, the ink beginning to bleed where the raindrops hit it, smearing the legal dissolution of my marriage into unintelligible gray streaks. Grant stood 5 feet away from me. He did not look like the man I had promised to love in sickness and in health. He looked like a statue carved out of ice and resentment. He wore a dark charcoal overcoat that repelled the rain. The collar turned up against the wind. A cigarette burned between his fingers, the smoke curling up to mix with the mist, disappearing instantly. He took a drag, his cheeks hollowing, and then exhaled a stream of gray that he blew deliberately in my direction. His eyes were terrifying. They were not angry. Anger implies passion, and passion implies that there is still something left to burn. Grant looked at me with a profound, terrifying indifference. It was the look you give to a piece of trash that has stuck to the bottom of your shoe, annoying, unsightly, and something to be scraped off before you enter a clean house. I wanted to say something. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him how 5 years of history could end with a signature and a rainy afternoon, but my throat was swollen shut with the kind of grief that tastes like copper. Grant reached into his inner coat pocket for a heartbeat. A foolish, pathetic part of me thought he was reaching for a handkerchief. Maybe he was going to wipe the rain from my face one last time. Maybe he was going to say he was sorry. Instead, he pulled out a red debit card. He did not hand it to me. He did not extend his arm. He looked at me, his lip curling slightly, and then he flicked his wrist. The card spun through the air, flashing red against the gray sky, and landed with a wet slap in a muddy puddle right between my feet. Dirty water splashed onto my ankles. I stared down at it. The plastic was bright red, cheerful and obscene against the asphalt. "The pin is your birthday," Grant said. His voice was flat, cutting through the sound of the falling rain like a serrated knife. I looked up at him, stunned. "There is $10,000 in that account," he continued, dropping the cigarette butt and grinding it out with the heel of his expensive Italian leather boot. "Consider it payment for your youth. Take it and get lost." The wind howled around the corner of the building, whipping my hair across my face. Payment for my youth. He spoke about our marriage as if it were a transaction, a service I had rendered and was now being severed from. He was buying me off. He was throwing money at me to make me disappear. My instinct was violent. I wanted to kick the card into the sewer drain. I wanted to pick it up and throw it back in his face, to scream that I did not want his dirty money, that I had dignity, that I was worth more than a severance package. My hand twitched at my side, ready to leave it there in the mud. But then, my stomach growled. It was a low, painful rumble that reminded me I had not eaten a real meal in 2 days. The sound was followed immediately by a flash of panic about the rent that was 3 weeks overdue. Then came the image of my mother, Diane, sitting in the doctor's office, her face pale as she showed me the invoice for her new medication. Pride is a luxury for the solvent. I was not solvent. I was destitute. Grant watched me. He knew. He knew exactly how empty my bank account was. He knew I had nowhere to go. He was waiting for me to break. Slowly, with hot tears mixing with the cold rain on my cheeks, I bent my knees. I lowered myself toward the puddle. The humiliation was physical. It felt like a weight pressing on the back of my neck, forcing me down. I reached into the dirty water. My fingers brushed the grit of the pavement as I grasped the slippery plastic. I pulled the card out, dripping with mud, and wiped it on the side of my dress. I stood up, clutching the $10,000. I felt smaller than I ever had in my life. Grant did not smile. He just nodded. Once, as if he had won a bet with himself. "Good luck." "Paisley," he said, but it sounded like a curse. He turned his back on me and walked toward the curb where his car was waiting. It was a sleek black sedan, the engine idling, the wipers rhythmic and steady. As he opened the driver's side door, the interior light flicked on, illuminating the cabin for a brief second. That was when I saw her. There was someone sitting in the passenger seat. I could not see her face clearly, just the silhouette of perfect posture and the gleam of expensive blonde hair catching the light. She was looking in the side mirror, watching me standing there in the rain with mud on my hands, and even through the distortion of the rain and the distance, I saw the curve of her cheek. She was smiling. It was a smile of victory. It was the smile of someone who has just watched the old model being taken to the junkyard so she could take her place in the showroom. Grant slammed the door. The car pulled away, tires hissing on the wet pavement, splashing more water onto my legs as it sped off into the Dallas traffic, leaving me alone. I stood there for a long time. The card felt hot in my palm, like it was burning my skin. $10,000. It was enough to pay the rent. It was enough to buy groceries. It was enough to keep the lights on. But as I watched his taillights disappear, a cold, hard stone formed in my chest. It replaced the heart that had just been broken. I looked at the card. I hated it. I hated him. I hated the woman in the car. "I will not use it," I whispered to the empty street. I walked to the bus stop, soaking wet, shivering violently. I vowed then and there that I would starve before I used his charity. I would work 3 jobs. I would scrub floors. I would skip meals. I would do whatever it took to survive without touching a single cent of his payoff. I would keep the card, but not as a safety net. I would keep it as a reminder of what he thought I was worth, a reminder of the moment he threw me away. That night, back in the small, damp studio apartment I had rented with the last of my savings, I dried the card off with a paper towel. I found an old shoebox where I kept a few letters and photographs I could not bear to look at, but could not bring myself to burn. I dropped the red card inside. It landed with a hollow thud. I put the lid on the box and shoved it deep under the bed, back into the darkest corner where the dust bunnies gathered. I told myself it was dead money. I told myself it was poison. For 7 years, I kept that promise, through the eviction notices, through the hunger pangs, through the nights I cried myself to sleep from exhaustion. I never touched it. I let the card sit there in the darkness, gathering dust, fueling my rage. I used the hatred of that moment, the rain, the mud, the $10,000 thrown like a bone to a dog, to keep me moving when my body wanted to quit. Now, sitting in the bank manager's office 7 years later, the echo of that rainstorm finally faded. I blinked, bringing the room back into focus. The red card was still there on the desk, but it no longer looked like trash. Elliot Harrow was staring at me, waiting for me to process what he had just told me. The card was not a severance package, it was a key. And I had been carrying it around in a shoebox for 2,555 days, completely unaware that while I was starving to prove a point, the man I hated had been counting on me to survive long enough to walk through these doors. For 7 years, my life was measured in the thinning soles of my work shoes and the expiration dates on clearance rack canned goods. I lived in a studio apartment in a complex that smelled permanently of boiled cabbage and damp drywall. The walls were so thin I could hear my neighbor cough. A rhythmic hacking that became the soundtrack to my nights. I found work at the Redwood Meridian Claims Bureau. It sounded impressive on paper. The kind of name that suggested mahogany desks and corporate retreats. In reality, it was a windowless basement floor where I sat in a cubicle farm under fluorescent lights that hummed with a headache-inducing frequency. My job was to process insurance denials. Day after day, I typed rejection codes into a legacy system, telling people that their water damage was not covered, that their theft claim lacked evidence, that their tragedies were not quite tragic enough for a payout. I lived on a budget so tight it squeaked. Dinner was often instant noodles, the kind that cost 30 cents a pack. I learned to doctor them up with stolen hot sauce packets from the break room or a single egg if I was feeling flush. I rotated which bills I paid late. Electricity one month, gas the next. I became an expert in the art of the grace period. And through it all, the red card sat in the shoebox under my bed. It was always there. It was a physical weight in the room. There were nights, usually around the 25th of the month when the bank account hovered in the single digits, that I would pull the box out. I would stare at the lid. I knew the PIN. I knew the balance. $10,000. It was right there. It was the difference between eating fresh vegetables and eating sodium-packed broth. It was the difference between a winter coat that zipped and one I had to hold shut with a safety pin. But every time I reached for the lid, I saw Grant's face. I saw the smoke from his cigarette and the dismissal in his eyes. I heard him say it was payment for my youth. If I spent a single dollar of that money, I was agreeing with him. I was admitting that I was a commodity he had purchased and discarded. I was admitting that I could not survive without his scraps. So I shoved the box back. I punished myself with poverty to preserve my pride. I carried a faux leather handbag I had bought at a thrift store. After 2 years, the strap began to peel, shedding little flakes of black plastic onto my shoulder every time I wore it. I colored the bald spots in with a permanent marker. I refused to buy a new one. To buy a new bag meant spending $40. To spend $40 meant I might be short on rent. To be short on rent meant I might have to use the card. It was a domino effect of anxiety that ruled every decision I made. Yet, there were moments when the universe seemed to take pity on me, or so I thought. There were times when Vernon Sykes, my landlord, a man with a face like a bulldog and a heart to match, would suddenly grant me an extension without a late fee. He would grunt and look away. Muttering that I could pay him next Friday, I thought I was charming him. I thought he saw a single woman trying her best and felt a flicker of humanity. Then there was the incident with my mother. Diane had been fighting breast cancer for 2 years. The bills were astronomical. One afternoon, I came home to find a letter from the hospital. I opened it with trembling hands, expecting a collection notice. Instead, it was a statement showing a zero balance for her last round of radiation. The note said a charitable grant had been applied to her account from a donor who wished to remain anonymous. I fell to my knees on the linoleum floor and wept. I looked up at the water-stained ceiling and thanked God. I thanked the universe. I thought it was a sign that I was doing the right thing. I thought my suffering was being rewarded by cosmic balance. I told myself that if I just kept grinding, if I just kept my head down and refused to take the easy way out with Grant's money, things would work out. I was wrong. The universe was not rewarding me. It was just winding up for a harder punch. 2 months ago, Mom's cancer came back. It was aggressive. The anonymous grant stopped coming. The hospital wanted money up front. At the same time, Redwood Meridian lost a major contract. My boss called me into his office, not to fire me, but to cut my hours in half. He called it restructuring. I called it a death sentence. I scrambled. I took the loan from the predatory lender because I had no credit score to speak of. I stopped paying the electric bill entirely. I stopped eating lunch. I lost 10 pounds I did not have to lose. The pressure built until this morning. I was leaving for work, stepping out onto the cracked walkway of the apartment complex. Vernon Sykes was waiting for me. He was not the grunting, lenient landlord of the past. He was red-faced and screaming. "You think you are special," he bellowed. His voice echoed off the brick walls, drawing neighbors out onto their balconies. "Mr. Sykes, please," I pleaded, trying to keep my voice low. "I just need 2 more days. I gave you 2 days, 2 weeks ago," he shouted. He pointed a thick finger at my chest. "You are 3 months behind. You think I run a charity ward. You think because you walk around here with your head high that you are better than the rest of us." I shrank back. The woman in apartment 4B was watching while smoking a cigarette. The man in 2C was leaning over the railing. I felt stripped naked. "You pay me by Friday or you get out." Vernon spat, "and I am keeping your deposit." He turned and stomped away, leaving me standing in the morning sun, shaking. I went back inside my apartment. I sat on the edge of my mattress. I looked at the peeling paint on the walls. I looked at the unpaid bills stacked on the wobbly table. I looked at the picture of my mother, who was currently lying in a hospital bed, wondering if her daughter could afford the next copay. I felt a surge of anger so hot it made me dizzy. I was done. I was done eating garbage. I was done being screamed at by men like Vernon Sykes. I was done freezing in the winter. I laughed. But it was a dry, jagged sound. Grant wanted me to take the money. Fine. I would take the money. I would take his $10,000 and I would shove it down Vernon Sykes's throat. I would pay the loan shark. I would buy my mother the best treatment $10,000 could buy. And then I would go back to being nothing. But at least I would be debt-free nothing. I got down on my hands and knees. I reached under the bed. The dust bunnies clung to my sleeves. I pulled out the shoebox. I opened the lid. The red card sat there, exactly where I had left it 7 years ago. It looked innocent. It looked like a piece of plastic. I picked it up. I put it in my purse. I did not put the shoebox back. I carried the box with me, tucked under my arm. As I walked out the door, I walked past the neighbors who were still whispering. I walked to the bus stop. I felt like I was carrying a bomb. I was marching to the Granite Harbor Bank to detonate the last shred of my pride. I thought I was surrendering. I thought I was losing the game. I had no idea that I was the only one playing a game that had ended years ago, and that the prize was something I could never have imagined in my wildest, hungriest dreams. Elliot Harrow slid a document across the polished mahogany desk. It was heavy stock paper, the kind that felt expensive against your fingertips, covered in dense rows of black text and figures that looked like a foreign language. The silence in the small glass-walled office was so thick it felt pressurized, like the cabin of an airplane right before your ears pop. I did not look at the paper. I kept my eyes fixed on Harrow's tie, which was a calm, reassuring shade of blue that contrasted violently with the chaos erupting in my chest. My hands were balled into fists in my lap, hiding the tremors that had started the moment Brielle Knox had looked at me with that expression of terrified awe. "Mr. Harrow," I said, and I was proud that my voice only shook a little. "I do not understand why we need to be in here. I do not need a consultation. I do not need a financial advisor. I just want to make a withdrawal." Harrow adjusted his glasses. He looked pale. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost walk through his lobby. "Ms. Reed," he said, his voice low and carefully modulated, "please look at the statement." I sighed, frustration warring with the anxiety. I looked down. My eyes scanned the header, seeing my name, Paisley Reed, printed in bold next to an account number that seemed too long to be real. I skipped the dense paragraphs of legal jargon about trust structures and yield aggregates. I looked for the bottom line. I looked for the $10,000. I expected to see fees. I expected to see that the $10,000 had been eaten away by 7 years of inactivity charges, leaving me with maybe $8,000. Or 6. I was ready to fight for every penny. I was ready to argue that a dormant account should not be penalized for the owner's despair. But I could not find the $10,000. I frowned. I traced the line across the bottom of the page. Total asset value. I blinked. I saw a 2, then a comma, then a 1, then another comma, and then a string of zeros that stretched out like a train wreck. "I think there is a mistake," I said. I felt a strange buzzing in my ears, like a faulty fluorescent light. "I told you. My ex-husband put $10,000 in this account. That is the limit." Harrow leaned forward, clasping his hands on top of the file. "There is no mistake. Ms. Reed," he said. I pointed a shaking finger at the number. "This says 2 million. Actually," Harrow corrected gently, "it says $2,145,612.33. The world stopped. Literally stopped. The hum of the air conditioner, the muffled sounds of the bank lobby outside, the beating of my own heart. It all just ceased. I stared at the number. I counted the commas again. I counted the digits. My brain tried to process the information, but it was like trying to download a movie onto a calculator. It just flashed an error message. $2 million. I looked up at Harrow. I felt like I was going to throw up. "This is a joke," I whispered. "Grant is doing this. Is he watching? Is there a camera?" Harrow shook his head slowly. "This is not a prank, Ms. Reed. The account your husband opened for you 7 years ago was not a standard savings account. It was a high-frequency trading trust equipped with an aggressive algorithmic reinvestment protocol." He spoke the words clearly, but they meant nothing to me. "He put $10,000 in." I insisted, my voice rising to a pitch that sounded hysterical even to me. "He threw it in a puddle. He told me it was payment for my youth, that $10,000 was the seed capital," Harrow explained, his tone patient, as if he were explaining physics to a toddler. "But the instrument he used, it is rare. It is called a legacy release. It locks the capital in a closed loop. It buys into high-risk, high-yield positions that most retail banks do not even touch. It compounds daily. It was designed to grow, Ms. Reed, and it was designed to remain completely inaccessible until a specific trigger event occurred." I sat back in the leather chair, feeling the air leave my lungs. $2 million. Vernon Sykes was threatening to throw me on the street for $1,200. I had eaten half a stale bagel for dinner last night. "What trigger event?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "You," Harrow said. "Me. The system is coded to a biometric and temporal lock," Harrow said. "It required 2 things to unlock the funds. First, the secondary account holder, you, had to present the physical card and verify your identity in person. And second, you had to do it exactly 7 years from the date of inception." He tapped the calendar on his desk. "Today," he said. "If you had come in yesterday, the system would have shown a 0 balance. If you had come in tomorrow, the account would have liquidated and donated itself to a pre-selected charity. You had to walk through those doors today." I stared at him. The room began to spin. Grant. Grant had done this. Grant, who had looked at me with ice in his veins and told me to get lost. He had set a timer on a bomb, but instead of exploding, it had turned into gold. "Why?" I asked. The word tore out of my throat. Why would he do that? Why would he make me wait 7 years? Why would he let me starve? Harrow did not answer. Instead, he reached into his drawer and pulled out a thick cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with red wax, stamped with a symbol I did not recognize. He placed it on top of the bank statement. Then he placed a small, rectangular business card next to it. "This was in the vault, attached to the account instructions." Harrow said, "It is for you." I reached out. My hand was trembling so bad I could barely grasp the envelope. It felt heavy. Inside, I could feel the outline of something hard, like a flash drive or a key. I looked at the business card. It was blank except for a handwritten address and a time. 3 o'clock this afternoon. There is an authorized executor who has been notified of the account activation. Harrow said softly, "He is waiting for you at this address." I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 1 in the afternoon. "I need to call Grant." I said suddenly. I grabbed my phone from my purse. The screen was cracked, a spiderweb of glass over the display. I pulled up the contact I had not deleted in 7 years. "Grant, Ms. Reed." Harrow started, half rising from his seat. I ignored him. I hit the call button. I pressed the phone to my ear, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I needed to scream at him. I needed to ask him if this was some kind of twisted psychological torture. To make me live in poverty for 7 years, just to hand me a fortune when I was already broken. The line clicked. "We are sorry," the automated voice said. "Cheerful and robotic. The number you have dialed is not in service. Please check the number and try again." I hung up. I dialed again. My fingers slipped on the cracked screen. Same voice. Not in service. I dialed a 3rd time. Tears were blurring my vision now. "Pick up." I hissed. "Pick up, you bastard. Pick up and tell me why you did this, Ms. Reed. Please," Harrow said. He sounded alarmed now. I slammed the phone down on the desk. "Why won't he answer?" I shouted. The dam finally breaking. He has $2 million in my name. He knew I would come. Where is he? Harrow stood up. He walked around the desk. He looked uncomfortable, like he was delivering a diagnosis. He cannot answer. Ms. Reed. I looked up at him, wiping the angry tears from my face. What do you mean he cannot answer? Is he in jail? Is he out of the country? Harrow took a deep breath. He looked at the file on his desk, then back at me. He seemed to debate with himself, weighing professional secrecy against human decency. The file contains a death certificate, he said quietly. The silence that followed was absolute. What? I whispered. The grantor, Harrow said, his voice gentle. Mr. Grant Whitaker. The system notes that the creator of this trust passed away. I froze. My brain rejected the words. Grant could not be dead. Grant was the villain. Villains do not die. They live in penthouses and drive black sedans and laugh at women who ruin their shoes in the rain. Grant was the force of nature that had ruined my life. You cannot kill a force of nature. When? I asked. Harrow hesitated. The record indicates 6 years and 9 months ago. I stared at him. 6 years. He had died 3 months after the divorce. 3 months after he threw the card at me. I stood up. My legs felt like they were made of water. I grabbed the envelope. I grabbed the black card Harrow had prepared to replace the old red one. I did not touch the bank statement. I could not look at the numbers anymore. I walked to the door. Ms. Reed, Harrow called out. You need to sign the release forms. I did not stop. I pushed open the glass door. I walked past Brielle Knox, who was still staring at me. I walked past the security guard. I walked out of the air-conditioned silence of the bank and into the blinding, humid heat of the Dallas afternoon. I stood on the sidewalk. The city noise washed over me. Horns honking, engines revving, people talking. But I felt completely alone. I looked down at the sleek black card in my hand. It was heavy. It was made of metal. It held enough money to buy this entire city block. Grant was dead. He had been dead the whole time. While I was eating instant noodles, while I was crying over eviction notices, while I was cursing his name every night before I slept, he was gone. But if he was dead, then who had set this up? Who was waiting for me at the address on the card? And why had Grant left me a fortune that he knew he would never see me spend? I looked at the sky. It was blue and cloudless, mocking me with its brightness. I felt a cold shiver ripple through me despite the heat. I was rich. I was free. And I had never been more terrified in my life. The heat of the Dallas afternoon felt heavy, pressing down on my shoulders like a physical weight. But inside my veins, my blood ran cold. I stood on the sidewalk outside the Granite Harbor Bank, the black metal card burning a hole in my palm. The noise of the city seemed distant, muffled by the roaring in my ears. Grant was dead. That was what the banker had said. But bankers deal in numbers, not people. I needed a person. I needed someone who knew the man, not the account. My fingers, numb and clumsy, scrolled through the contacts on my cracked phone screen until they landed on a name I had not looked at since the day I walked out of my marriage. Owen Mercer. Owen had been Grant's shadow. They were business partners, best friends, two sides of the same ambitious coin. Where Grant was charismatic and reckless, Owen was quiet and calculating. He was the one who fixed things, and on the day of the divorce, standing in the rain while Grant threw the card at my feet. Owen had been there. He had stood by the car, holding the door open. He had not looked away. I remembered his eyes now. They had been wide, desperate, pleading. At the time, I thought he was looking at me with pity. Now, I wondered if he had been trying to scream without opening his mouth. I pressed the call button. The phone rang. Once, twice. I expected a disconnect message. I expected a stranger to answer. I expected silence. Instead, the line clicked open. There was no hello. There was no polite confusion about who was calling. There was just the sound of a heavy exhale, the sound of smoke being blown out of tired lungs, followed by a voice that sounded like gravel grinding against glass. You finally remembered the card, Owen said. His voice was not surprised. It was resigned. It sounded like he had been sitting by the phone for 2,555 days waiting for it to ring. I leaned against the hot brick wall of the bank building, my knees buckling. Owen, I choked out. My voice was thin, unrecognizable. I need you to tell me where he is, I said, pushing the words past the lump in my throat. I just left the bank. They told me something insane. They told me the account is worth millions. They told me Grant is gone. I need you to tell me it is a lie. I need you to tell me where he is hiding so I can go there and throw this money in his face. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I heard the flick of a lighter. You want to see him? Owen asked. His tone was flat, devoid of the mockery that used to color Grant's voice. Yes, I hissed. I want to see him right now. Then you better bring a shovel, Owen said, because Grant is 6 feet under. He died 6 years and 9 months ago. Paisley. The phone slipped in my sweat-slicked hand. I caught it against my chest, gasping. Hearing it from Harrow, the banker, was one thing. Hearing it from Owen was final. It was real. Grant is dead, I whispered. Since the week after you signed the papers, Owen said. His voice cracked. Just a fraction, revealing a fissure of grief that had not healed in 7 years. I slid down the wall until I was crouching on the pavement, ignoring the stares of passers-by. It made no sense. If he died right after the divorce, who managed the money? Who set the timer? Who was the woman in the car? We need to talk, Owen said. Not over the phone. Where? I asked. Lone Star Diner, he said. The booth in the back. 20 minutes. The line went dead. The Lone Star Diner was a relic of our past. It was a greasy spoon on the edge of town where Grant, Owen, and I used to sit for hours in our early 20s, nursing bottomless coffees and plotting how we were going to conquer the world. It was the place where Grant had first sketched the logo for his company on a napkin. It was the place where he had proposed to me. I took a cab. I could not trust myself to navigate the bus system. I spent $50 of my last $70 on the fare, a reckless expense that made my stomach turn out of habit. Even though I had a black card in my pocket that could buy the taxi company, the diner looked exactly the same. The neon sign was still buzzing with a defective letter S. The smell of frying bacon and stale cigarette smoke hit me the moment I opened the door. It smelled like nostalgia. It smelled like heartbreak. I walked to the back. Owen was already there. If I had not been looking for him, I might not have recognized him. The Owen Mercer I remembered was sharp, clean-shaven, a man who wore suits like armor. The man sitting in the booth looked like a ruin. His hair was completely gray, thinning at the temples. His face was etched with deep lines that spoke of sleepless nights and chronic stress. He wore a wrinkled button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that looked thinner than I remembered. He had a cup of black coffee in front of him and an ashtray already filled with 3 cigarette butts. I slid into the booth opposite him. The vinyl squeaked. Owen looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked at me. Really looked at me. Taking in my cheap cardigan, my tired face, the desperation radiating off me in waves. You look like hell. Paisley, he said softly. I laughed. A sharp, hysterical bark. I look like hell. You look like you died with him. Owen flinched. He picked up his coffee cup, his hand trembling slightly. Touché. I slammed my hand down on the table. The cutlery rattled. Explain it to me. Owen, explain to me how a dead man turns $10,000 into $2 million. Explain to me why he told me to get lost and then left me a fortune. Explain to me why I have been starving for 7 years while this money sat in a vault waiting for an anniversary. Owen took a slow sip of coffee. He set the cup down with deliberate precision. He did not leave you $10,000. Paisley, Owen said. He left you everything. He liquidated his entire position in the company. He sold every stock, every bond, every asset he owned. He put it all into that trust. The 10,000 was just the number he told you because he knew you. He knew I would be insulted, I said bitterly. He knew you were proud. Owen corrected. He knew that if he gave you $1,000,000 that day, you would have thrown it back at him. Or worse, you would have stayed. I stared at him. What do you mean? I would have stayed. Of course I would have stayed. We were married. You do not leave someone just because they have money. Owen shook his head. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. He tapped one out but did not light it. He just rolled it between his fingers. Staring at the tobacco, "You do not understand," he said. He did not want you to stay. He needed you to leave. He needed you to hate him. Why? I demanded. My voice rose, attracting the attention of the waitress, who glanced over and then decided to stay away. Why would he want me to hate him? We were happy. We were building a life. And then one day he just turned cold. He started coming home late. He started smelling like perfume. He started treating me like a stranger. I stopped. The memory of the woman in the car flashing in my mind. The blonde woman, the smile. He had someone else, I said. The venom seeping into my voice. I saw her. I saw her in the car that day, the blonde girl. He left me for her. Owen looked me dead in the eyes. The expression on his face was not pity. It was a terrible, crushing sadness. There was no someone else. Paisley, he said. I saw her. I insisted. You saw Paige Larkin, Owen said. The name meant nothing to me. Who is Paige Larkin? I asked. She is an actress, Owen said. A struggling actress from the local theater district. Grant paid her $5,000 to sit in that car. He paid her to smile at you. He paid her to wear expensive clothes and look like the kind of woman who steals husbands. I sat back. The breath knocked out of me. An actress. A hired prop. Why? I whispered. Why go to such lengths to break my heart? Owen leaned forward. His voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried the weight of a sledgehammer, because he knew he could not save himself. Owen said, but he thought he could save you. Save me from what? I asked. From happiness. From a husband who loved me. From watching him rot. Owen said brutally. I recoiled as if he had slapped me. The day he asked for the divorce. Owen continued. His eyes locked on mine. Grant had just come from the oncologist. He did not have a midlife crisis. Paisley, he had a diagnosis. Stage 4. It was everywhere. Lungs, liver, brain. The doctors gave him 6 months, maybe less if he was lucky. The diner seemed to tilt on its axis. The noise of the kitchen faded into a high-pitched whine. No, I whispered. No, that is not true. He would have told me. I was his wife. He knew you, Owen said again. He knew that if he told you, you would have stopped living. You would have spent every second of those 6 months in a hospital chair, holding his hand, watching him turn into a skeleton. You would have drained your savings trying to find a cure that did not exist. You would have been traumatized. You would have been a widow at 26 with a head full of nightmares. Tears spilled over my eyelids, hot and fast. So he decided to destroy me instead, I said, my voice trembling. He decided to cut you loose, Owen said. He decided that it was better for you to hate him and be alive than to love him and be destroyed by his death. He staged the affair. He staged the cruelty. He staged the divorce. He made himself the villain so you could walk away with a clean conscience. He wanted you to be angry. Anger is a fuel. Paisley, grief is a sinkhole. He wanted you to use that anger to survive. He paused. Looking down at his hands, he counted on your pride. Owen said, he knew you would take that card and shove it in a box. He knew you would struggle, but he also knew you were the strongest person he had ever met. He bet everything on the fact that you would make it to the 7-year mark. Why 7 years? I asked, wiping my face with my sleeve. Because that is the statute of limitations on certain financial contestations, Owen said mysteriously. And because he wanted to make sure you were far enough away from the pain of the divorce to handle the money without guilt. He looked up at me again. That day in the rain, Owen said, his voice thick with emotion. When he threw that card at you, when he told you to get lost, He got back in the car and he did not drive off with his mistress. He drove 2 blocks and pulled over and vomited blood. He cried. Paisley. He cried like a child. He loved you more than he loved his own life. I stared at Owen. The image of the arrogant, cruel man I had hated for 7 years shattered. In its place was a man dying alone in a car, breaking his own heart to save mine. The $10,000 was not an insult, Owen said softly. It was a seed, and the silence for 7 years. That was his final gift. He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. His skin was cold. He did not leave you. Paisley. He pushed you out of the way of a falling building. The neon buzz of the Lone Star Diner sign seemed to drill into my temples, keeping time with the throbbing ache behind my eyes. I looked at Owen, really looked at him, and saw the ghosts of the last 7 years etched into every line of his face. He was not just tired, he was haunted. So it was all a lie, I said, my voice barely rising above the clatter of silverware from the kitchen. The woman, the cruelty, the rain. It was a production. Owen corrected, his voice raspy. It was the most expensive, painful production ever staged, and the audience was an audience of one. You. He took a drag of his unlit cigarette, a nervous tick that betrayed how hard this was for him to retell. It started with a cough. Owen said, You remember the cough? I nodded slowly. I did remember. In the last few months of our marriage, Grant had developed a dry, hacking cough. He had blamed it on stress, on the dust at the warehouse, on allergies. He had dismissed it with that arrogant wave of his hand that I used to love and eventually came to hate. It was not allergies, Owen said. It was an aggressive, small-cell carcinoma. By the time he actually went to see a doctor, it had metastasized. It was in his lungs. It was in his lymphatic system. The oncologist gave him 6 months on the outside, maybe 3 if he wanted to stay lucid. I felt a phantom pain in my chest, a physical sympathy for a man I had spent years wishing dead. He did not tell me. I whispered, I could have taken care of him. I would have been there. That is exactly what he was afraid of, Owen said, his eyes locking onto mine. He knew you. Paisley. He knew that if he told you the truth, you would have dropped everything. You would have quit your job. You would have sold the house. You would have spent every waking moment watching him wither away. You would have become a nurse, a caretaker, a widow before you were 30. He leaned across the table, his expression fierce. He did not want your last memory of him to be a skeleton in a hospital bed, Owen said. He did not want you to smell the antiseptic and the decay. He wanted you to remember him as strong, even if that meant remembering him as a monster. So he hired Paige Larkin, I said, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. Owen nodded. She was a drama student at the community college. He explained she needed tuition money. Grant paid her $5,000 to sit in that car, check her makeup in the mirror, and smile like she owned the world. She did not even know who you were until afterward. She thought it was some kind of divorce settlement dispute. When she found out later that Grant had died, she came to my office and cried for an hour. She felt like an accomplice to a crime. I looked down at my hands. I had hated that woman. I had compared myself to her for years. I had looked in the mirror and wondered what she had that I lacked. And she was just a girl trying to pay for school, playing a role in a script my husband had written. And the money, I asked, why $10,000? Why not more? Why not less? That was the hardest calculation. Owen said, he spent nights agonizing over that number. Owen used his finger to trace a circle on the Formica table. If he gave you nothing, you would have starved immediately. Or you would have fought the divorce for alimony. He explained, if he gave you $100,000, you would have felt guilty, or you might have used it to hire a lawyer to find out where the money came from. But $10,000, that was the sweet spot. He looked up at me. It was enough to be a safety net, but small enough to be an insult. Owen said, it was an amount that said, I am paying you off like a cheap service. He knew it would sting. He knew it would wound your pride so deeply that you would shove that card in a box and refuse to touch it. He banked on your anger. He knew your anger would make you gritty. He knew your anger would make you get up every morning and work 3 jobs just to prove you did not need him. I felt the tears finally spill over, hot and fast tracks down my cheeks. He was right, I whispered. I hated him so much it kept me warm. He sold the company, didn't he? I asked, the realization hitting me. That is where the $2 million came from. Owen nodded. Arc Lumen Freight Systems. We were on the verge of a national breakout. We had offers coming in from logistics giants. The valuation was sky high. But a sale like that takes months, sometimes a year. Grant did not have a year. He sold it in a week. Owen said, he took a fire sale price. He let a competitor buy us out for 60 cents on the dollar just so he could get the cash liquid immediately. He destroyed his professional legacy to build yours. He took every cent from the sale, after paying off the debts and severance for the staff, and he dumped it into that trust. Owen continued. He set up the legacy release. He specifically chose a blind trust structure that reinvested dividends automatically. He locked it down so tight that not even God himself could touch it until the 7-year mark. Why 7 years? I asked again. Because he knew you. Owen said simply, he figured it would take you about 5 years to get over the anger, and another 2 years to get desperate enough to swallow your pride. He wanted to make sure that when you finally walked into that bank, the money had grown enough to set you up for life, not just for a year. He paused, his voice trembling. I sat with him, Paisley, in that little apartment he rented after he left the house. He did not go to a hospital. He did not want to be in the system where you might find him. He died in a room with a single window and a cot. I covered my mouth with my hand, suppressing a sob. The last week was bad. Owen whispered. The pain was... It was bad. He was delirious half the time, but every time he woke up, he asked for his phone. He would dial your number, his thumb hovering over the call button. I watched him do it 100 times. He wanted to hear your voice. He wanted to tell you he was scared. He wanted to tell you he loved you. And I asked, my heart breaking, and every time, he would close his eyes, take a breath that sounded like rattling chains, and put the phone down. Owen said, he would say, not yet. She needs to be strong. If I call her, she will come here, and I cannot let her see me like this. Owen reached out and stubbed out his unlit cigarette, crushing it until the paper broke. He died alone. Paisley, because he decided that your future was more important than his comfort. Owen looked at me, his eyes wet. You sat there for 7 years thinking he was living the high life with a blonde model. Owen said, you cursed his name. You threw away his pictures. You let that hate fuel you, and that is exactly what he wanted. Because if you had known the truth, if you had known he was dying in a dark room 2 miles away, you would have died with him. He leaned back, exhausted. The $10,000 was not charity. Paisley, he said softly, it was not a payoff. It was a trampoline. He put it there so that when you finally hit rock bottom, when you finally fell as far as you could go, you would bounce back higher than you ever were before. I sat in the booth, the smell of bacon grease and stale coffee suddenly overwhelming. I thought about the red card in the shoebox. I thought about the days I had gone hungry. I thought about the sheer, unadulterated hatred that had powered me through the darkest nights of my life. And I realized, with a clarity that was blinding, that the man I had hated was the only man who had ever truly loved me. He had not just given me money. He had given me a narrative. He had made himself the villain so I could be the hero of my own survival story. He was a fool, I said, my voice shaking. A stupid, stubborn, arrogant fool. Yes, Owen agreed, a sad smile touching his lips. He was, but he was right. You are here, you are alive, and you are rich. I looked at the black card in my hand. It no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like an apology. It felt like a love letter written in the language of compound interest and self-sacrifice. But there is one thing I do not understand. I said, looking up at Owen. If he sold the company, and he put all the money in the trust, then who was sending the anonymous checks for my mother? Who convinced Vernon Sykes to give me extensions on the rent? Owen's expression shifted. A flicker of something like guilt crossed his face. Grant did not just leave money. Paisley, Owen said. He left instructions. He left a plan. And he left eyes to watch over you. We left the diner in Owen's car. A silent drive that felt less like a journey and more like a funeral procession. I expected him to drive us to a cemetery, or perhaps to a lawyer's office in the glass towers downtown where the air was filtered and the carpets were thick. Instead, he turned the wheel and navigated the car into a neighborhood that made my stomach knot with familiarity. It was my neighborhood. He pulled up to a crumbling brick building on 4th Street, just 5 blocks away from the efficiency apartment I had called home for the last 7 years. I stared at the peeling paint on the front door. I had walked past this building 1,000 times. I had dragged my laundry past it. I had hurried past it in the rain. He was here, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Owen nodded. Apartment 4C. We climbed the stairs. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and damp carpet, the universal scent of poverty. Owen unlocked the door with a key that looked heavy in his hand. He pushed it open and stepped aside, letting me walk into the tomb of the man I had hated. The room was small. It was smaller than my own. The air inside was stale, preserved like a museum exhibit, heavy with the sharp, chemical sting of rubbing alcohol and the underlying mustiness of old sickness. There was a single iron bed frame pushed against the wall, the mattress stripped bare, revealing the rust stains on the springs. A plastic folding table sat in the center of the room, covered in a layer of gray dust. I walked further in, my shoes crunching on the cheap linoleum. It was not a home. It was a holding cell. On the table, there were no pictures. There were no mementos of the successful life Grant had lived. There were only artifacts of survival. I saw a row of orange prescription bottles, all empty, their labels faded. I saw a stack of hospital invoices, crumpled and smoothed out again, as if someone had clenched them in a fist of pain. I saw a clipboard hanging on a nail with a handwritten chart ticking off medication times. 8 in the morning, 12 at noon, 4 in the afternoon, 8 at night. The handwriting became shakier as the dates progressed. The strong architectural slant of Grant's writing in the first month slowly disintegrated into a jagged scrawl by the 6th. I walked to the window. It was the only source of light in the room. A heavy blackout curtain was pulled halfway back, pinned in place with a binder clip. And there, mounted on a strange, makeshift tripod, constructed from duct tape and a camera stand, was a pair of high-powered binoculars. They were pointed downward, angled sharply toward the street. He watched me. I said, a cold shiver running down my spine. The idea felt invasive. I felt a flash of the old anger. He was stalking me. He was sitting up here in his tower, laughing at me while I struggled in the mud. He was not watching you to control you. Paisley, Owen said from the doorway. He was checking to see if you were still standing. I hesitated, then leaned down. I pressed my eyes to the cold rubber eyepieces. The magnification was intense. The world rushed at me, blurring for a second before snapping into focus. I gasped. The lenses were not trained on my apartment window. They were not trained on my front door. They were focused perfectly, with laser precision, on the metal bench at the bus stop on the corner of Elm and 5th. I pulled back, blinking, then looked again. It was the bench where I sat every morning at 6:30 to go to work. It was the bench where I sat every evening at 7, usually eating a granola bar because I was too tired to cook. It was the bench where I had sat in the pouring rain 4 years ago, sobbing into my hands because I had been fired from my second job. He could see everything. He could see the holes in my shoes. He could see the dark circles under my eyes. He could see me shivering. He sat in that chair for hours, Owen said, his voice soft. When the pain got too bad for him to sleep, he would sit there and wait for your bus. He memorized your schedule. If you were 5 minutes late, he would panic. He would call me and make me drive by your route just to make sure you hadn't been hit by a car. I stepped away from the binoculars, feeling like I had been punched in the gut. He had not been laughing. He had been witnessing. He had been forcing himself to watch the suffering he had caused, unable to look away, unable to help, or so I thought. Owen walked over to the plastic table and picked up a thick, leather-bound notebook. The cover was worn, the corners soft and frayed. He held it out to me. "You need to read this," he said. I took it. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I opened it to a random page near the middle. October 14th, 2019. The handwriting was jagged. Paisley looked thin today. The gray coat is missing a button. She was counting change at the newsstand to buy a coffee but put it back. I called the hospital billing department. I told them I was a representative from the Angel Wings Foundation. I paid the radiation copay for Diane, $540. I told them it had to be anonymous. If Paisley knows it is me, she will refuse it. She has to believe the world is still good. She has to believe luck is on her side. I stared at the words. The Angel Wings Foundation. I remembered that day. I remembered calling Mom, crying with relief because the bill had vanished. We had celebrated with a frozen pizza. We had toasted to miracles. It was not a miracle. It was Grant. I flipped the page. January 3rd, 2020. Vernon Sykes is threatening her again. I can see him yelling at her on the stoop. I hate that man. I want to go down there and break his jaw. But I can't walk to the bathroom without leaning on the wall. I sent Owen. Owen paid Sykes $1,200 cash to cover her arrears. We made Sykes sign an agreement to say it was a loyalty extension for a long-term tenant. Paisley walked away looking taller. Good. Keep your head up, sweetheart. Do not let them break you. I dropped the notebook onto the bed. It landed with a heavy thud, kicking up a cloud of dust. Everything. I whispered, clutching my chest. Every lucky break. Every time the universe gave me an inch. It was him, not everything. Owen said, "You did the work, Paisley. You worked the double shifts. You took care of your mother. You survived the loneliness." He just smoothed the road a little. He removed the rocks that would have killed you. I picked up the notebook again, flipping to the very end. The last few pages were barely legible, the ink trailing off into scratches. There was a note on the final page, circled in red ink. Do not let Paisley know. This is the most important part. She must believe she stood up on her own. If she thinks she needed me, she will never realize how strong she actually is. Let her hate me. Hate is a structure. Pity is a cage. I sank onto the mattress. The springs groaned under me. I looked around the room. The peeling wallpaper, the empty pill bottles, the lonely chair by the window. I tried to imagine him here. My husband, the man who wore tailored suits and drove fast cars. I tried to imagine him sitting here in the dark, wrapped in a blanket, watching me through a lens while his body ate itself from the inside out. He was right there. I choked out. He was 5 blocks away. I could have walked here. I could have held his hand. Owen leaned against the window frame, looking out at the view Grant had memorized. There was one day, Owen said quietly. It was about 3 weeks before the end. It was storming. A real Texas thunderstorm. The sky was black, and the rain was coming down in sheets. I listened, tears streaming down my face. He saw you get off the bus. Owen continued. You didn't have an umbrella. You were using a newspaper to cover your head, but it was soaked through. You looked miserable. And he snapped. He couldn't take it anymore. Owen gestured to the door. He grabbed an umbrella from the corner. He tried to run out the door. He said he was going to just hand it to you and run away. He just wanted you to be dry. Owen paused, his voice catching. He made it to the hallway. Owen said, he took 2 steps toward the stairs and his legs gave out. He collapsed right there on the dirty carpet. I found him 10 minutes later. He was crawling. Paisley. He was trying to crawl down 4 flights of stairs because he couldn't bear the thought of you getting wet. I closed my eyes and a sob ripped through my throat, a raw, ugly sound that echoed in the empty room. I imagined him crawling. I imagined him lying on the floor, gasping for air, clutching an umbrella he could never deliver. while I walked home cursing his name because my shoes were wet. He paid for my pride with his pain. I whispered. I looked at the notebook in my lap. I had spent 7 years patting myself on the back for my resilience. I had looked in the mirror and told myself I was a survivor, a self-made woman who needed no one. I had built an entire identity around the idea that I had overcome the abandonment of a cruel husband, but I hadn't overcome anything alone. I had been carried. I had been protected by a ghost who lived in a $400 apartment and starved himself to make sure I had a future. My strength was real, but the ground I stood on was built from his bones. I hugged the notebook to my chest, rocking back and forth on the rusted bed. The smell of the room, the sickness, the medicine, suddenly smelled like love. It was a twisted, tragic, agonizing love, but it was the purest thing I had ever known. I missed him. I wailed. I missed him for 7 years, and I didn't even know I was missing him. Owen walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. He knew. Owen said, "He knew you loved him. That is why he had to do it this way." I looked up at Owen, my eyes burning. "This isn't just money," I said, realizing the full weight of the inheritance. The $2 million, the notebook, the apartment, no. Owen said, "It is an apology, and it is a test." "A test?" I asked. He wanted to see what you would do when you found out. Owen said, he wanted to know if the woman who survived 7 years of hell would use the power he left her to build something new, or if she would just burn it all down in anger. I looked at the binoculars one last time. I wiped my eyes. "I am not going to burn it," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "I am going to use it, and God help anyone who tries to take it from me. Money has a frequency. I used to think silence was the sound of poverty, the way my phone never rang and my inbox stayed empty for years. But I was wrong. Poverty is loud. It is the sound of creditors calling at dinner time and landlords pounding on doors. Wealth, I discovered within 24 hours of leaving the bank, is a broadcast signal, and somehow, even though I had told no one but a dead man's best friend. The signal had gone out. Maybe it was a teller at the bank who whispered to a boyfriend. Maybe Vernon Sykes had seen the courier delivering the heavy, bonded paper portfolio from the investment firm to my doorstep. Maybe the universe just shifts when the balance in your column goes from -3 digits to 7. My phone, which had been a paperweight for the last decade, began to vibrate so hard it nearly danced off the table. It started with a cousin I had not seen since my wedding. Her name was Brenda. Brenda had not called when my mother was diagnosed with cancer. She had not called when I was divorced, but suddenly, she was blowing up my voicemail. "Hey Paisley," she said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet affection that made my skin crawl. "I heard you came into some good fortune. That is so amazing. Listen, Todd and I have been looking at this investment opportunity for a jet ski rental business in near Lake Louisville. We just need $50,000 to get off the ground. We would pay you back with interest, obviously. Call me, cousin. Love you, love you." The words felt like slime. Then came the high school friends, people who had walked past me in the grocery store for 7 years without making eye contact, sent me messages starting with "Hey stranger," and ending with links to GoFundMe pages for their cat's surgery or their startup breweries. They wanted $10,000 here, $20,000 there. They asked for it casually, as if asking for a stick of gum. I sat in my apartment, staring at the screen. I did not feel generous. I felt a cold, hard rage solidifying in my gut. These were the vultures. Grant had died alone in a room 5 blocks away to protect this money. He had eaten ramen and stared out a window in pain so that I could be safe. And these people wanted to pick the meat off his bones before he was even cold in my memory. Then there was Vernon Sykes. The knock on the door came at 6 in the evening. It was not the sledgehammer pounding of yesterday. It was a polite, rhythmic rap. I opened the door. Vernon was standing there. He was wearing a clean shirt. He had combed his hair. He was holding a fruit basket. "Paisley," he said, flashing a smile that showed too many yellow teeth. I just wanted to come by and apologize for our misunderstanding yesterday. We were both heated. I stared at the basket of bruised apples and cheap cellophane. What do you want? Vernon, I asked. He chuckled. A nervous, wheezing sound. Well, I was thinking, you have been a tenant here for a long time, and this building, well, it has overheads. I realized I have been undercharging for certain amenities, the hallway lighting, the water pressure. I think it is only fair we discuss a retroactive utility fee, just a small adjustment. Say, $5,000 to clear the books? He looked at me with greedy eyes. He knew. He smelled the money, and he thought I was still the scared girl who would pay anything to keep a roof over her head. I looked at him. I thought about the mold in the bathroom he refused to fix. I thought about the heat that never worked in January. I thought about Grant sending Owen to pay him off so I wouldn't be evicted. I will get back to you on that. Vernon, I said. I closed the door in his face. I did not lock it. I did not need to. The next morning, I did not go to work at the Redwood Meridian Claims Bureau. Instead, I took a cab to the high-rise district. I walked into the offices of Holloway, Finch, and Carver. It was a firm that did not advertise on billboards. They were the kind of lawyers who destroyed lives in boardrooms and buried settlements in vaults deep underground. I hired a senior partner named Elias Thorne. He was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and dressed in Italian silk. I told him everything. I showed him the trust documents. I gave him a retainer that made his eyebrows rise. Just a fraction. Lock it down. I told him, I want an irrevocable asset protection trust. I want a fortress. No one touches a cent of this money without my signature in triplicate. And if anyone from my past tries to claim a debt, I want you to bury them in so much paperwork they will need a shovel to find the sun. Thorne smiled. It was a shark's smile. Consider it done. Ms. Reed. Then, I went to work on my revenge. I did not scream at Vernon Sykes. I did not throw cash in his face. That is what a lottery winner does. I was not a lottery winner. I was the widow of a genius. I spent 3 hours photographing every violation in my apartment building. The exposed wiring, the black mold, the fire exits that were chained shut, the rats in the basement. I compiled it all into a formal dossier. I sent it to the City Housing Authority, the Fire Marshal, and the Department of Health. I attached a note CCing Holloway, Finch, and Carver, implying that a class action lawsuit from the tenants was imminent if the city did not act. 2 days later, I sat on the bench across the street, the same bench Grant had watched from his window, and watched the show. 4 city vehicles pulled up. Inspectors in hard hats swarmed the building. I saw Vernon running out, waving his arms, his face turning a distinct shade of purple. I saw an inspector slap a bright orange condemned warning on the front door, pending immediate structural remediation. I saw Vernon slump against the wall, realizing that the fines he was about to face would bankrupt him. He had wanted $5,000. I cost him his building. Next was the friend who had pitched me a pyramid scheme disguised as a female empowerment network. She had harassed me for years to buy her essential oils. And now she was demanding I buy into her diamond tier for $15,000. I did not block her. I forwarded her entire pitch deck, which promised guaranteed returns, to the Federal Trade Commission and the State Attorney General's Office for Fraud. I watched her social media page disappear 3 days later. I was methodical. I was precise. I felt Grant guiding my hand with every email I sent. But I was not just a sword. I was also a shield. I went to the hospital billing department. I did not wear a fur coat. I wore my same gray cardigan. I sat down with the billing administrator and wrote a check for my mother's entire treatment history. Every radiation session, every chemo drip, every overnight stay. The administrator looked at the check, then at me. Ms. Reed, she said, her voice shaking, this covers everything, and I want to prepay for the next 12 months. I added, and one more thing. I want you to clear the debt of the woman in the room next to my mother, Mrs. Gomez. She has been crying about her deductible for weeks. Pay it. But if you tell her it came from me, I will take my business elsewhere. I walked out of the hospital feeling lighter than air. I bought a coffee from the vending machine. It tasted like victory. I went back to my apartment to pack. I was not going to stay, but I was not going to leave in a limousine. I was packing my few clothes into a suitcase when there was another knock at the door. I stiffened. If it was Vernon again, I was going to have him arrested for harassment. I opened the door. It was not Vernon. Standing in the hallway, looking terrified and clutching a large manila envelope to her chest, was a woman with blonde hair that had lost its expensive sheen. She wore jeans and a t-shirt, and she looked like she hadn't slept in a week. I recognized her instantly. The curve of her cheek, the posture. It was the woman from the car. The mistress, Paige Larkin. She looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. "Paisley," she whispered. I stood in the doorway, blocking her path. I did not feel anger anymore. I just felt a dull ache. "What do you want?" "Paige," I asked. She held out the envelope. Her hands were shaking. "I cannot keep this anymore," she said, her voice cracking. "I saw the inspectors today. I heard about the money. I know you know." "Know what?" I asked. "That it was all a lie," she said. She took a step closer, pleading. "Grant gave this to me before he died. He made me promise to keep it until you went to the bank. He said if I gave it to you too early, you would not be ready. But I can't have it in my house anymore. It feels like he is haunting me." She thrust the envelope into my hands. It was heavy. I could feel the outline of a hard, rectangular object inside. "I am sorry," she sobbed. "I am so sorry. I needed the tuition money. I didn't know he was dying until it was too late." She turned and ran down the hallway, her footsteps echoing on the stairs, leaving me standing there with the last piece of the puzzle in my hands. I walked back into my apartment. I went to the bathroom mirror. I looked at myself. I saw the same face I had seen for 33 years. But the eyes were different. The fear was gone. The desperation was gone. I touched the envelope. I thought about the vultures calling my phone. I thought about Vernon Sykes sweating on the sidewalk. I thought about the debts I had erased with a stroke of a pen. Grant wanted me to be strong, I said to my reflection. I straightened my spine. Well, I am strong, Grant, and I am not going to let anyone eat off your grave. The heavy manila envelope Paige had shoved into my hands felt warm, as if it still held the body heat of the man who had sealed it nearly 7 years ago. I sat on the floor of my apartment, my back pressed against the door I had just closed. The silence of the room buzzing in my ears. The cheap laminate flooring was cold beneath me, but I could not bring myself to move to the couch. I was grounded here, in the wreckage of my own assumptions, holding the final piece of Grant Whitaker. I ran my thumb under the flap. The wax seal cracked with a dry snap. Inside, there was a single sheet of yellow legal pad paper and a silver USB drive. The drive was cold metal, heavy and sleek, looking out of place against the paper that was wrinkled and stained with what looked like coffee rings, or perhaps dried tears. I unfolded the paper first. The handwriting was not the jagged scrawl I had seen in the medical logbook Owen had shown me. This was clearer, though still shaky, written perhaps a week or two before the end, when he still had some control over his fingers. Paisley, it read, if you are reading this, it means you finally went to the bank. It means you were backed into a corner so tight that you had to swallow that legendary pride of yours. I am sorry. I am sorry I had to be the one to put you in that corner. But I knew you would never jump unless the floor fell out from under you. Watch the drive. It explains the rest. And Paisley? I never liked that blonde. She chewed gum too loud. I let out a wet, choked laugh that turned instantly into a sob. Even from the grave. He was trying to make me smile. He was trying to lighten the load he had placed on my shoulders. I scrambled up and grabbed my laptop. It was an ancient machine I had bought used 3 years ago, the fan whirring like a jet engine as it struggled to boot up. I plugged the silver drive into the side port. A folder popped up on the screen labeled simply, "For Paisley, play me first." I clicked the file. A video player opened. The screen filled with static for a second. And then, there he was. Grant. My breath hitched in my throat. He was sitting in the very room Owen had taken me to, the one with the peeling wallpaper and the smell of sickness. He was sitting in the chair by the window. He looked terrible. His cheekbones jutted out like razors. His skin was the color of old parchment, and he was wearing a hoodie that looked 3 sizes too big for his shrunken frame. But his eyes were the same. They were bright, intelligent, and filled with a terrifying amount of love. "Hey, Ace," he said. His voice was raspy, missing the deep resonance I remembered, but the nickname hit me like a physical blow. He leaned into the camera, adjusting the angle. "I am going to keep this short because, well, I do not have a lot of breath left," he said, flashing a weak, lopsided grin. "By now. Owen has probably told you the basics, the cancer, the staging, the reason I had to make you hate me, and I know you. Paisley, you are sitting there right now feeling guilty. You are thinking you should have been there. You are thinking you could have saved me." He paused, his expression turning serious. "Stop it. You could not have saved me. You would have just drowned with me. I wanted you on dry land." He took a sip of water from a plastic cup, his hand trembling violently. He set it down and looked straight into the lens, as if he could see me sitting on my floor 7 years in the future. "But there is something Owen does not know," Grant said, "something I could not tell him because he is a terrible liar and he would have gotten himself killed." My stomach tightened. "Killed?" "The money in the trust," Grant said, his voice dropping lower. "The $2 million. It is not just the proceeds from the sale of Arclumen, it is bait." I leaned closer to the screen. "When I got sick, I tried to sell the company quickly," Grant explained. "But my partner, my former partner, Darius Kent, you remember Darius? The guy with the expensive teeth and the cheap suit?" I nodded at the screen. I remembered Darius. He was a shark in a world of dolphins, a man who always smiled, but never with his eyes. Darius found out I was dying. Grant said, "He tried to force a buyout for pennies. He tried to blackmail me. He threatened to tie up the assets in litigation until I was dead, so he could take the whole company for free. He knew the company was worth millions, and he wanted it all. He thought he could squeeze a dying man." Grant's eyes hardened. A flash of the old, ruthless businessman appeared. "So I moved the money," Grant said. "I sold the company to a third party before Darius could file his injunctions. I took the cash and I buried it in the Legacy Release Trust. I made it invisible. I made it untouchable. Darius has spent the last 6 years looking for this money. Paisley, he thinks I hid it in offshore accounts. He thinks I buried it in shell companies. He has no idea it has been sitting in a bank in Dallas, waiting for a broke girl with a red debit card to walk in and claim it." I felt a chill run down my arms. The phone calls, the sudden interest from old friends. It wasn't just greed. It was a hunt. "Darius is going to come for you." Grant said, "The moment that account goes active, a flag is going to pop up on his radar. He has been monitoring my social security number and my estate for years. He is going to try to say the money was stolen. He is going to try to say I defrauded the company. He is going to try to scare you." Grant reached down and picked up a thick stack of papers from his lap. "That is what the other files on this drive are for," he said, shaking the papers at the camera. "Folder B, it contains every email Darius ever sent me, every threat, every illegal ledger adjustment he made to skim profits off the top. I recorded our conversations. Paisley, Texas is a one-party consent state. I have him on tape admitting to embezzlement and extortion. He dropped the papers. If Darius Kent shows his face," Grant said, "you do not just defend yourself. You bury him. You give these files to the lawyers, and you send him to prison for 20 years. He leaned back, exhausted by the speech. He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his strength. "I put a timer on the account for a reason." He whispered, "If you did not claim it today, the money would have gone to the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. I had to put a deadline on it because I knew that if I gave you forever, you would never use the card. I had to force you to choose between your pride and doing something good with the capital. I knew you would not let $2 million burn just to spite me. He smiled again, softer this time. You are the strongest woman I know. Paisley Reed, you survived me leaving you. You survived the poverty. You survived the silence. Now, survive the victory. He raised his hand and touched the screen, his finger pressing against the glass. I love you, he said. I have always loved you. Now go get them. The screen went black. I sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark monitor. The tears were drying on my face, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. Grant hadn't just left me a fortune. He had left me a weapon. He had known that the wolves would come, so he had given me the teeth to fight them. He had protected me from poverty, yes, but he had also shielded me from Darius Kent, acting as a lightning rod even from the grave, hiding the assets until I was tough enough to hold them. My laptop chimed. It wasn't an email. It was a notification from my phone, which was sitting on the floor beside me. I picked it up. Unknown caller. My heart hammered against my ribs. It had been less than 48 hours since I walked into the bank. The signal had gone out. The sharks were circling. I swiped the screen to answer. I put the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. Is this Ms. Paisley Reed? A man's voice asked. It was smooth, polished, and arrogant. It sounded like a suit that cost $5,000. Who is calling? I asked. My name is Sterling Vance, the voice said. I am the lead counsel representing Mr. Darius Kent. I looked at the silver USB drive sticking out of my laptop. I am listening. I said, Mr. Vance cleared his throat. It has come to our attention that you have recently accessed unauthorized funds that were misappropriated from Arc Lumen Freight Systems during the tenure of the late Mr. Whitaker. We are filing an emergency injunction this afternoon to freeze all assets associated with the Granite Harbor account. He paused, waiting for me to panic. He was waiting for the gasp. He was waiting for the terrified widow to beg for mercy. We can do this the hard way, Ms. Reed, or we can settle. Vance continued. If you agree to return 80% of the principal, Mr. Kent is willing to overlook your complicity in your husband's embezzlement. I looked at the black screen where Grant's face had been just moments ago. I looked at the folder labeled Folder B. I gripped the phone tighter. You want to freeze the assets? I asked, my voice steady, cold, and dangerous. That is the immediate step. Yes, Vance said. Go ahead. I said. There was a silence on the other line. Excuse me, Vance asked. I said go ahead. I repeated. File your injunction. Freeze the money. But before you do, Mr. Vance, you might want to ask your client about the emails from November of 2018. Ask him about the ledger adjustments in the third quarter, and ask him if he remembers what the penalty is for extortion in the state of Texas. The silence on the other end stretched out, heavy and stunned. I am not the woman you think I am, I said, and I am not alone. Tell Darius I will see him in court, and tell him to bring a toothbrush. He is going to need it where he is going. I hung up the phone. My hand was not shaking. I pulled the USB drive out of the laptop. I stood up. The game was on. And thanks to Grant, I held all the aces. 3 days later, I returned to Granite Harbor Bank. I did not stand in line this time. I did not clutch a frayed handbag or worry about the scuffs on my shoes. I wore a navy blazer I had bought the day before, sharp and tailored, and I walked flanked by Elias Thorne, the senior partner from Holloway, Finch & Carver, the security guard, the same one who had watched me with suspicion 72 hours ago, held the door open for me. I nodded to him. He nodded back. Sensing the shift in the atmosphere, I was no longer the prey. I was the predator. We were ushered into the main conference room on the top floor. The view was spectacular, looking out over the Dallas skyline, a sprawl of glass and steel that shimmered in the heat. Seated at the long oval table were Elliot Harrow, looking anxious, and 2 men I did not know. Sitting at the head of the table, however, was a man I knew all too well, Darius Kent. He had aged. The last time I saw him, he was mocking Grant for being soft in negotiations. Now, he looked bloated. his expensive suit straining at the buttons, his face flushed with a mixture of arrogance and greed. Next to him was Sterling Vance, the lawyer who had called me, looking like a viper ready to strike. Darius did not stand up when I entered. He just smirked. "Well, look at this," he said, his voice oily. The grieving widow finally decides to come out of hiding. "You look well. Paisley." Amazing what a stolen fortune can do for the complexion. I sat down opposite him. I did not smile. I placed my hands on the table. Palms flat. "Mr. Kent," Elias Thorne said, his voice deep and rumbling like thunder, "we are not here to exchange pleasantries. You requested this meeting to discuss the disposition of the Whitaker Trust. We are here to reclaim stolen property." Vance cut in, sliding a thick stack of documents across the table. "We have evidence that the funds used to capitalize this trust were embezzled from Arc Lumen Freight Systems. We are filing for an immediate freeze of all assets pending a federal investigation." Darius leaned back, crossing his arms. "You are done." "Paisley," he said, "you thought you could sit on this money for 7 years and I would forget. Grant was a thief, and by accessing this account, you are an accessory. I am going to strip you of every dime, and then I am going to put you in a cell." The room went silent. Harrow looked terrified. I looked at Darius. I thought about the emails on the USB drive. I thought about Grant crawling down the hallway to bring me an umbrella. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly. Darius blinked, surprised by my tone. "Excuse me," he said. "I asked if you were finished." I repeated, "Because if you are done threatening me, I have something for you." I reached into my bag and pulled out the silver USB drive. I placed it on the table. Then, I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a printed execute command from the Trust's digital architecture. My husband anticipated this moment. "Darius," I said, "he knew you. He knew you were greedy, and he knew you were sloppy." I slid the paper toward him. "This account is not just a bank vault," I explained, my voice steady. "It is a logic trap. Grant programmed a specific clause into the legacy release. It is called the Counter-Strike Protocol." Vance frowned, snatching the paper. "What is this?" he muttered. "The moment any external party attempts to freeze, seize, or contest the funds in this trust," I continued, "the system automatically decrypts a secondary file server. That server contains 7 years of your personal emails. Darius, it contains the audio recordings of you threatening to blackmail Grant. It contains the ledger adjustments you made to siphon off $3 million from the company pension fund in 2018. Darius's face went from flush to a sickly shade of gray. "That is a lie," he stammered, but his eyes were darting around the room. "It is all on this drive," I said, tapping the silver metal. "And here is the beautiful part. The protocol is linked to the court filing system. If your lawyer files that injunction today, the evidence package is automatically emailed to the district attorney, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the IRS." I leaned forward. "Grant turned the money into a trigger," I whispered. "You touch the money, you go to prison." Vance was reading the document rapidly, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked at Darius. He looked at the paper. He looked at me. "Mr. Kent," Vance said, his voice tight, "we need to withdraw. Immediately." "What?" Darius shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "No, she is bluffing. Read the clause." "Darius," Vance hissed, "it is irrevocable. If we proceed, we are handing the authorities a signed confession." Darius stared at his lawyer. Then he looked at me. He saw the cold, hard truth in my eyes. He realized that the man he had bullied, the man he had thought was weak, had spent his dying days building a cage for this exact moment. "Grant beat you 7 years ago," I said. "You just did not realize you had lost until now." Darius opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked small. He looked defeated. He grabbed his briefcase with a shaking hand and stood up. "Let us go," he muttered to Vance. They walked out of the room without another word. There was no shouting. There was no dramatic exit, just the quiet shuffling of feet as a bully realized he had no power left. I watched the door close. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for a decade. Elias Thorne smiled at me. That was impressive. Ms. Reed, I turned to Elliot Harrow. He was staring at me with awe. Mr. Harrow, I said, I am ready to sign the release papers now. He scrambled to open the file, of course. Ms. Reed, and how would you like to receive the funds? A wire transfer to a personal account. I picked up the pen. I want to withdraw enough to pay off my debts and purchase a modest home. I said, but the rest? The principal balance. I want to establish a foundation. A foundation? Harrow asked. Yes, I said, signing my name with a flourish. The Bright Harbor Oncology Relief Fund. It will provide anonymous financial assistance to cancer patients who cannot afford treatment. No names, no recognition, just help. Just like Grant, I thought. I left the bank an hour later. The sun was setting, painting the Dallas sky in streaks of purple and gold. I went straight to my mother's house. She was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, looking frail but spirits high. She saw me coming up the walk and smiled. Hey, baby, she said. You look different today. You look light. I sat down on the step beside her. I took her hand. It was rough and warm. I am okay. Mom, I said softly. I know you are. She said, you are always okay. You are a survivor. No, I mean, we are okay. I corrected her. The debts are gone. The medical bills are paid. You do not have to worry about the heat or the rent or the medicine ever again. She looked at me, confusion clouding her eyes. Paisley, what did you do? Did you win the lottery? I squeezed her hand. No. I said, I just finally accepted a gift I should have taken a long time ago. I did not tell her about the millions. I did not tell her about the revenge. She did not need to know the darkness. She just needed the light. Later that night, Owen picked me up. We drove out of the city, away from the noise and the lights, until we reached a small park by a lake. It was quiet here. The water was black and still, reflecting the stars. This is where we scattered him, Owen said, his voice thick. We stood on the wooden dock. The air was cool. I pulled out the USB drive one last time. I had copied the files to a secure cloud server, but I wanted to hear his voice one more time. I plugged it into my phone and played the end of the video. Don't make money a prison. Paisley, Grant's voice whispered in the dark. Make it a door. Walk through it and do not look back. I looked at the water. I could feel him there. Not in the past, but all around me. He was in the cool breeze. He was in the fact that I was standing there without fear. He was in the future I was about to build. I am not looking back. Grant, I whispered. I turned to Owen. He lit a cigarette, the flame illuminating his tired face. What now? He asked. Now, I said, watching the smoke curl up toward the stars. Now we live. I walked off the dock and into the night. For the first time in 7 years, I was not running away from something. I was walking toward something. I had my life back, and I had a love that had defied death to make sure I kept it. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let us know in the comments where you are tuning in from, as I would love to connect and hear your thoughts. Do not forget to subscribe to the Morgan Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.